If you're trying to understand why Tom Cruise keeps getting called the king of the box office, the honest answer isn't that every single film he's ever made was a monster hit, because that would be a myth, but that across 4 decades, he's built something rarer than a perfect record, a repeatable audience-facing system for turning movies into events, plus the resilience to absorb the inevitable misses without losing the public's trust. You can see the event blueprint most clearly in the numbers behind Top Gun. Maverick, a film that didn't just perform well, it dominated like a once-in-a-generation crowd pleaser, finishing with about 718.7 factors domestic and 1.496 IB worldwide, on a reported budget in the 170-177 million range, and it did it by selling the promise of a theatrical experience, practical flying, clean geography, clear stakes, a star who still looks like he's doing the job for real, at a moment when a lot of big releases were training audiences to wait for streaming, and when the bet worked, it didn't merely make money, it refreshed Cruise's brand as the guy who can still bring multiple generations into the same auditorium and make them clap at the end. The key is that this wasn't a random lightning strike, but a payoff from long-term brand compounding, because the original Top Gun already showed Cruise's early superpower, turning a movie into a cultural appointment, ending at roughly 357.3 million worldwide. And Maverick took that nostalgia and fused it with modern craft and marketing discipline, rather than treating it like a museum piece, which is why it didn't burn out after opening weekend but held like a phenomenon. That same system, recognizable persona, relentless physical credibility, and a promise that the audience will get what the trailer sells, also explains why the mission. Impossible films became a kind of rolling box office insurance policy, especially in an era when movie stars as a concept were supposedly fading, because even when individual entries vary, the franchise is built around a single, easily understood contract with the public. Cruise will risk his body so you don't have to, and you'll see something you can't fully replicate at home. The peak example is Mission: Impossible, Fallout, which sits as a signature hit in modern action not only critically but commercially, with roughly 220.2 million domestic and about 824.2 million worldwide when including later re-releases, and a reported production budget around 178, 180. And Wikipedia also notes large additional spending for promotion and distribution, meaning it wasn't just popular, it had the scale needed to justify the franchise's escalating ambition, and it delivered the kind of clean, legible spectacle, halo jump, helicopter chase, bathroom brawl, that sells across languages and borders. When people say Cruise is box office royalty, this is the kind of title defense they mean. He doesn't just show up, he anchors a product line that audiences understand and trust is what keeps repeat business alive. And yet, even inside a winning franchise, you can find the hit versus not hit story in miniature, because not every installment is equally easy to monetize. Mission: Impossible 2 did huge global business at about 546.4 million worldwide and over 215.4 million domestic, but it's also remembered as a more stylized, era-specific entry, and its success reflects not only Cruise's pull but the early 2000s appetite for glossy action and the novelty of the brand at that moment. Mission: Impossible 3 pulled in about 398.5 million worldwide. Still a large number in normal human terms, but softer relative to blockbuster expectations, suggesting that a franchise can be alive and yet not fully eventized until it finds the right tone and pattern. That tone snapped into place in the 2010s, where Ghost Protocol and Rogue Nation and later Fallout built a rising ceiling, with Ghost Protocol around 694.07 worldwide and Rogue Nation about to 710.9 million worldwide, showing the compounding effect of quality control and consistent branding. People weren't buying a single movie anymore. They were buying a promise that the next one will be worth leaving the house for. But the most important part of the King narrative is that Cruise's power is not just about hits, it's about how his flops happen and what they do not destroy, because the public doesn't crown you for never failing. They crown you for remaining bankable after failure. Take Mission: Impossible, Dead Reckoning. Part 1, which finished around 571.11 billion worldwide and 172.6 million domestic, numbers that would look like a victory lap for many films, but ran into the modern blockbuster problem. The budget and the marketplace moved the goalposts, with Wikipedia listing a budget of about 291 million, meaning that even a big worldwide gross can feel financially disappointing once you stack production, marketing, and the complicated realities of theatrical splits. This is what flop often means in 2020's Hollywood. Not that nobody went, but that the cost structure inflated so much that good attendance doesn't equal good profit. And Cruise's role here is fascinating because he's simultaneously the reason the movie can earn that much at all, and part of the reason it costs so much, because his brand is tied to expensive real-world action that takes time to capture. Outside the spy brand, Cruise's hit profile is equally about choosing projects that translate into clear audience motives like thrill, romance, awe, or prestige, and delivering them at a professional level that creates word-of-mouth durability. War of the Worlds landed around 603.9 nanometers worldwide, proving he could still carry a massive, scary, effects-driven Spielberg thriller as a human anchor rather than a superhero, while Jerry Maguire, a completely different product, character-driven and dialogue-forward, reached about 273.6 meter worldwide on a listed 50-mailer budget, the kind of star-plus concept pairing that shows Cruise can sell emotion and humor as reliably as explosions. In the older part of the filmography, films like Rain Man, about 354.8 mm worldwide, A Few Good Men, about 243.2 mm worldwide, Interview with the Vampire, about 223.7 mm worldwide, Minority Report, about 358.4 mm worldwide, and The Last Samurai, about 454.6 mm worldwide, sketch a pattern that's easy to miss if you only look at opening weekends. Cruise has consistently positioned himself at the intersection of mainstream accessibility and a sense of quality, working with major filmmakers and high-concept material in a way that helps each movie feel like it matters, and that matters feeling is what keeps adult audiences showing up even when the genre changes. This is also why some movies that are labeled underperformers don't actually weaken him long-term, because the audience doesn't only judge by a raw global total, they judge by whether the experience felt like a fair trade, and in some cases the marketplace, not the movie, sets the ceiling. Oblivion is a clean example of a mid-tier modern Cruise performer, about 286.2 mallas worldwide, not franchise level, but strong enough to show international strength and star-driven curiosity, and it didn't require the film to become a cultural meme to justify its existence. Edge of Tomorrow is even more instructive because its theatrical worldwide gross sits around 381.1 men on Box Office Mojo, with Wikipedia commonly citing about 370.5 monitors worldwide against a 178 monitors budget, a math equation that can make the film look like a disappointment in the moment, even though many viewers later treat it as one of Cruise's best modern sci-fi action efforts, which highlights a core truth about hits and flops. The label is often time-bound, based on cost and timing and marketing clarity, while the audience's relationship to the movie can grow for years afterward. And then there's the kind of flop that really matters to a box office king. The high-profile would-be franchise starter that fails to ignite because that's where star power gets tested, not just as an opening weekend tool, but as a full life cycle guarantee. The Mummy, 2017, is the cautionary tale here. About 409.2 mallas worldwide sounds large until you notice the big gap between international and domestic, about 80.2 mallas domestic, roughly 329.0 mallas international, and then you combine that with the reported budget uncertainty. Wikipedia lists a wide range, 125, 195, and the articles note that once marketing is counted, the break-even point may have been much higher, with losses estimated in the tens of millions. This is how you get a movie that grossed hundreds of millions and still gets remembered as a flop. The business model assumed it would launch a universe, dominate domestically, and earn audience affection strong enough to justify sequels, and instead it became a lesson that Cruise can't brute force a brand the audience doesn't believe in, especially if the tone feels like corporate planning rather than a story people are hungry for. But notice what happened next, and why it reinforces the king thesis rather than defeating it. Cruise didn't get dethroned, he course-corrected, doubled down on the most audience-trusted part of his identity: practical spectacle, clear genre delivery, and projects that treat viewers like partners, and then came back with a run that culminated in Top Gun, Maverick turning into one of the biggest movies on the planet. That's the secret sauce behind the crown, and it's less mystical than it sounds. Cruise's biggest hits usually share a few visible traits: simple stakes you can pitch in one sentence, kinetic sequences you can't ignore on a big screen, and a leading man presence that signals he'll carry the story with intensity rather than irony, while many of the movies that get tagged as flops or disappointments tend to share different traits: unclear brand identity, costs that sprint, ahead of realistic earnings, or a mismatch between what the marketing promises and what the audience feels it receives. In other words, the king of the box office idea isn't a claim that Cruise never misses. It's a claim that his hits are so large and so repeatable, and his misses are usually survivable enough that the overall career behaves like a long-running franchise of its own, where each project is an episode in a bigger story about trust, craft, and the willingness to stake his reputation on the physical reality of what's on screen. And if you want the simplest explanation for why this still works in 2026 when the industry keeps changing, it's that Cruise sells a specific old-fashioned value proposition that's become newly scarce. He sells the feeling that you're not just watching content, you're attending a movie. And that's why, hit or flop, people keep showing up to find out whether he pulled it off again.